right, I think we'll get going.
Awesome.
Hi, welcome everybody. There are some new faces in the crowd here. So I will say welcome to those of you who have joined us for this second panel of the CU 2022 Pride Fest. Thank you to those of you at home who are watching either live, or if you have stumbled onto this in the future, you made a great choice. The panel's fantastic. Anyway, enough of my dumb jokes. My name is Nicole Franklin. My pronouns are she, her, they. I'm the Director of Operations for United Pride of Champaign County. And tonight, I am honored to be joined by four truly incredible panelists to discuss the intersectionality of reproductive justice. So to get us started, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how this came about. So when I heard about the Supreme Court decision leak, decision had not been big yet, which is the leak, you know, like I'm sure so many of you, I was angry, I was sad, I was feeling pretty hopeless, and I just needed to do something, anything, to get rid of this hopeless, helpless feeling I had. And so I went about making an impromptu protest. It was thrown together for later that day. That's how angry I was. And I had literally no idea if anyone was going to show up or not, but it turns out that a lot of people felt as angry and sad and frustrated as I was. And plenty of people wanted to come together in community. One of those people is the person sitting next to me, Representative Carol Ammons. And while you're there, Carol pulls me aside and says, we need to do a panel on this, and we need to talk about it. And I was just like, that's absolutely happening, and I immediately went to work. And I'm incredibly grateful that we're finally able to pull together. I'm very grateful for the rest of the panel that said yes to coming on and talking about this, because this is truly an incredible group. In addition to having our amazing Illinois State representatives here, we are also joined by Dion Strathman, Director of Community Engagement and Education for Planned Parenthood of Illinois, Karen Sims, the Director of the Trauma and Resilience Initiative, and Dr. Ann Robin, who is Champaign-Urbana's Public Health District's Medical Director and was a long-time Planned Parenthood physician. And so I just want to say, thank you all for joining me tonight. You are here in person, you may know. All right. So listen, we're going to jump right into this. And I'm just going to start real quick, obviously. What do we mean when we say the intersectionality of reproductive justice? What are we talking about here? And of course, I'm going to start with Representative Ammons because this was your idea. Take it away.
All right. That closer. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, great. First and foremost, thank you all so much for joining here in person and those who are viewing this via Facebook, I assume, and YouTube. We appreciate the time and the topic. Secondly, I can't find my notes. Whatever I say is all my fault. I'm standing all or present who did a great job preparing this, but nonetheless. Listen, you know, when the decision came and we heard that the decision was going to be made, we had a little bit of somewhat of a heads up that this was potentially going to happen, right? And the General Assembly responded by passing the Reproductive Health Act in Illinois and repealing the provision from our Constitution and the trigger law that would be in place if and when the Supreme Court decided that they would take action on this issue. But before that point, I have been working, my husband Aaron Ammons, who's here in the audience, and he can wave to us. we have been working for a very long time on another point of intersectionality that happened at the Supreme Court level that I don't think people really paid attention to, the precursor of this action that reproductive health actually took, which was the gutting of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Section 2 and Section 5. That was the first hit. That was the first hit that went on the ballot to say, we are going to change the course of voting rights in the country and allow for this to happen. We'll back up one more again before that happened. And we had an election that was taking place that was a really critical election, but I don't believe that us in the country responded appropriately to head off what had become a stacked Supreme Court that got us to this point in the first place. When we don't respond appropriately to the moment that we're in and don't recognize it for what it is, or we see it as somebody else's issue, and we don't respond because it doesn't seem to touch me in my issue area, then we kind of sit until it's your turn. And we saw that happen with the Muslim ban, right? You remember that thing, they wanted to stop all Muslims from coming to the country. And then we saw it again in the LGBTQ community. And then we saw it at the border where they began to lock up children and their families at the border under the Trump administration. All of these things are happening within our space prior to this decision. Now, 40 years, 50 years prior to that, the institutions that we consider institutions of higher learning have these think tanks, and many of these think tanks are coordinating, and they're studying these issues to see what they can and cannot do, or what the American people will or will not allow them to do and get away with it. And so we saw that happen with Democracy and Change, which is the name of the book. Democracy and Change really pointed out that the Koch brothers have been funding this for 50 years, seeing what they could do to dismantle this masses that was forcing them to accept others in the country other than white males. And so we saw this constant dribble. It's happening over and over again. It's kind of slow and we're not paying attention. And then they do another action against us. And then we mobilize for a minute and then we go back to normal. And we keep doing this over and over again until we get to this moment when the caste system that they developed has now visited all of us here in our LGBTQ community. Well, now they're talking about, we're going to roll back that thing called marriage equality next. So what I am very keen and very, very aware of is that if we don't start saying, you know what, all politics are local, right? When Brett Kavanaugh was on this interview with the U.S. Senate, and he said, oh, no, that is settled law, 50 years of settled law. We already figured that out. We were never going to do it. I sat there and watched and said, this person is lying. They've been calling this for 40 years. Why do you think they stacked the Supreme Court? I said all that to say that at this moment, we, all of us who are in community together, all of us who respect the humanity of each other and allowed to make our own decisions regardless of what political positions people may think we should or should not have, we have the rights to live as we so choose. And in this case, we have to respond to the fact that we are being assaulted, and we're being assaulted on a very specific level, in very specific ways. And that is happening local, that is happening state, and it's happening federally. And if we're not paying attention, it's also happening in fascism internationally, where we are not responding appropriately. So I'll leave it there for right now. We'll come back and deal with what I mean by responding appropriately.
Well, you have more to say? That's nice. So at this point, I just want to say this is a conversation. While I will point certain questions at people, I do want all of you to speak on all the questions, and if you have to say something. What are we talking about? Intersectionality, reproductive justice. What does that mean? What are we talking about? What's the meat of this issue? Do any of the rest you want to jump in on?
Okay, so Sorry, I'm much louder than I thought it was going to be. When we talk about reproductive justice, I just want to start with some basic things. One, reproductive justice was a term that was coined by a group of Black women who got together and was looking at the reproductive rights movement and really seeing that there was a lot of things missing. There are a lot of intersecting identities that were not being considered, and really think about access. How do we access care when we have some intersecting identities that are making it harder to access that care? The three tenets of reproductive justice is one, being able to say if and when someone chooses to have a child and how they will give birth to that child. If they choose not to have a child, how they will prevent pregnancy or end that pregnancy. And then if they choose to parent, being able to parent that child in a safe space with supportive social systems. And so when we think about reproductive justice, we're not just thinking about reproductive health, reproductive rights, we're thinking about a human rights framework. We're putting all of these things in. We're thinking about the fight for 15. We're making sure that people are making enough money that they can raise their children and raise them in a healthy way, right? So we want to think about not just rights, we want to think about access, because that's the heart of reproductive justice. Even if we all have the same rights in the state, we don't all have the same access. And we all, again, have intersecting identities, and some of those identities make it harder to access things, such as living in poverty. And of course, people of color are more likely to live in poverty. Women are more likely to live in poverty. Trans people are more likely to live in poverty. So all of these things are impacting these communities much more than, say, someone who has intersecting privilege. And when I say intersecting privilege, I'm saying like things like white, male, master's degrees. Those are all making these rights easier to access. So I also just always want to point that out when we talk about intersectionality. We want to talk about the intersection of oppression, but also privilege.
So, really complete sentence, and I also, I think when I think about justice, I just want to, and my understanding of reproductive justice is also right for structural wrongs, right? Does that make sense? So a lot of times people hear access and they think, wow, we put up a local clinic, right? But justice says that there have been a history of policies, procedures, and practices that have caused individuals, families, and communities harm, right? And that if we're not changing those policies, procedures, and practices, and so when we think about reproductive justice, we're thinking about everything from where and how people do it, but like, how did that get created? You know, how do structures of poverty reinforce disempowerment? So if I cannot choose when and how I have children, right, or who I love, or who I partner with, and there are policies in your local systems, in your community, in your organization, how do we make those right if there are barriers to my health, wellness, and well-being? And I think if we think about that every day, we're constantly either buying into systems of harm, right? We're complicit with it, or we're a part of dismantling those systems, and that's why I think it all matters. So I'm just gonna say something parenthetically. Like I came into my work, my journey of human services through the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and right, every day, like at the beginning of the epidemic, I started my work at a time where we were thinking about women actually being impacted by HIV. But every single policy, right, from housing to healthcare to prescriptions to choice to where I live to who runs the organization, who designs the policy, who tells me what I can take and how I can take, right, was a justice and equity issue. And I think we have lost a lot of that thought about the political, social, economic capital that is required And so, right, if anybody who's just having this as a conversation around a woman's right to choose or the right to marry, and is not thinking about the power structures, is missing this conversation, because we're in a moment where people are saying, your ability, first of all, our accountability to you as people who make decisions no longer exists, except to control you. And that's a very powerful statement, right? Where the power brokers are saying, you have no right to your own body's choice, life, and decisions, what you learn, what you study, how you love, how you see yourself. This is a really frightening moment, right? It's just a really frightening moment that I hope people feel, can start to like imagine, like what, like, you know, we play this all out, and someone says that we're not accountable for your poverty, right? We're not accountable to how you learn. We're not accountable to anything. You're just a cog in a wheel that is maintaining an economic system, political system. Sort of go back.
Those of you who don't get quite here, there's a little bit of noise out there. This is training us. So why are that so loud? Sorry, that's catching me, right? You got me, you know, it sounds like it's not. All right, I'm so sorry. Tell me wrong. Would you like to speak?
I think it's funny the noise, but it does make one pause. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues here, especially Representative Adams and Karen Sims, and my new colleague, Dion, for their incredibly articulate and forceful analysis. I don't get to hear talk like this often enough. I think my friends and I get together and talk about how bad things are, and then we decide to just have another piece of cake or something. But I absolutely applaud the second everything that you're saying, and I think this kind of deeper thinking needs to keep going forward. We're in an academic institution. I know people are doing this kind of thinking, but it's good to hear it here. I'm a primary care physician, personal health care provider. I worked in Planned Parenthood for more than 26 years. I work for public health right now. I started medical school in 1974 in Chicago, Illinois. And I did as many rotations as I could at Cook County Hospital because that was the place to be to learn the most, to have the most dedicated staff and interesting patients. And for me as a young medical student, it was really the place to be. And I have a very good memory of standing in a hallway with probably a kind of paternalistic doctor. I don't know if they put their arm on me or not. They did things like that back then. But they said, look down that hallway. See that hallway? That hallway. Are there any beds in that hallway? No. That hallway was full of beds 2 years ago. Full of beds of young women, some of them who died. In the era of self-induced illegal abortion, and Roe v. Wade changed all of that. So my entire medical education, my entire career until now was during the protection of Roe v. Wade. I didn't have to deal with that. I dealt with a lot of other problems, opioid addiction, domestic violence. We got plenty of problems with violence, lots of problems, but I didn't have to deal with that. So I'm kind of crying because it's so bad to see it coming back. It's just so bad. I don't know what's going to happen at Cook County Hospital now. I don't think they'll be putting beds in the hallway. I think they're much more prepared than that now. I know Planned Parenthood, Illinois spent at least a year, if not 2 or 3 years, planning for the projected onslaught of patients from other states coming into Illinois needing abortion services. But Brooklyn,
even with that advanced planning, we're playing catch up, and it does feel like we're moving back. The other thing, there's always something else, isn't there? We had Roe v. Wade, and then the very next year we had something called the Hyde Amendment. So, talking about intersectionality, the Hyde Amendment was basically a federal law saying that no federal money could be used under any circumstances to subsidize or pay for abortion services, that it all had to be private money. That thing caused so much headache and heartache over the years. So we got legalized abortion with Roe v. Wade, but then we immediately had the hammer of the Hyde Amendment. And guess who the Hyde Amendment affects the most? Women who don't have financial resources, which is poor women, women of color, young women, women in all kinds of minority communities. I just want to say a little word about this noise out here. I think the noise is friendly, as I said. I think it's just our friends who are just chattering among themselves. But we live in such a hostile environment now. I must say, I did think before I came here, you probably think every time you go to a speech, because I know when I worked for Planned Parenthood, we had such security, and I'm sure the security is even more now. But coming here to a public forum, sitting in a room like this, we're vulnerable. Somebody could break in here and do us harm, because there are people that actually wish that. So I'm sorry to be so personal, but I thought we had the high-level analysis, the good politics and the historical perspective, and I decided I would just put something personal into it. Because to me, the political is so personal, but I do appreciate the good thinking, clear thinking.
I actually think it's a fantastic transition to the next question, so I think we might as well get into it, which the next question I was just going to ask is, what are we talking about with the real world impact, right? With the Supreme Court ruling, that was step one. Now we are seeing an onslaught of legislation across this country, outright bans or significantly limiting rights, coming for contraception. I mean, trying to prosecute people who go across state lines, trying to prosecute doctors, it is coming from every angle, and it is coming fast, because as Representative Adams said, this has been decades now. They have a plan. So what are we talking about this real world impact? Are we going to see these hallways? Are we, what's really going to be happening? I'll start with John from Planned Parenthood, but of course, all of you should feel free to speak.
It's a really big question to answer. There are so many things that I can say right now. But first, I just want to say, the statistics I'm going to say are from the Planned Parenthood Institute, except for anything I say about Planned Parenthood, of course, will come from us. So in August, 30% of our abortion patients were from out of state. That is incredibly significant. When you think back on when Texas first did the 6-week ban, it was less than 2 weeks before we saw someone from Texas. And I always like to point that out because there are a lot of states between us and Texas. And think about how many states were full. They could not get appointments. They had to come all the way to Illinois. So 30%, that's just in August. That is going to increase because that was before the Indiana ban went into effect. It was paused right away, but still, we are already seeing a lot of our patients, especially our Champaign Center, coming from Indiana. I also want to point out that the antis that are there, the very violent people that stand outside of our health centers. On Saturday, I was escorting with our volunteers and had screaming at me in my face for 3 hours straight. They will travel across state lines. So it's not just patients that are coming over, it's really all of those people too. 75% of abortion patients are at the poverty line or low income. So, and I want to point out that people who live in poverty, people of color are more likely to live in poverty. Women are more likely to live in poverty. Gender expansive people are more likely to live in poverty. So when we're looking at how many of our patients are low income, where we know that this is a significant impact for communities of color, for queer communities. Not to mention people who are traveling, who are survivors of sexual assault, domestic abuse, incest, people who have just gone to college and are already struggling to kind of make it in their adult lives, you know? Like there's so many different intersecting issues that come into play. And when they have to travel, they have to take time off work. They have to pay for their plane ticket or their gas or their train ticket. They have to get a hotel here. They have to most likely get childcare because about 60% of people that get abortions are going to have children. So just the cost of having to travel to another state is outrageous. And then again, losing that time from work and taking off. It's a huge impact that is largely affecting certain communities. Again, people who are low income, people who live in rural areas who have very few options. They might not have any options within several states. They literally might have to travel across 4 states to get to us. They're on a low basis in the Midwest right now. But there's also a good surge that happened. Literally that weekend that the Dobbs decision was announced, not the week when the decision came out, we had thousands and thousands of people apply to be volunteers. And it was a lot of people saying, I'm so angry, I need something to do, I need to act. And we're still making our way through that huge list of people. And so whenever something like really bad happens and I see like all these people step forward and say, hey, I want to do something, I don't know, it takes this thing out a little bit for me because it reminds me that there's a lot of really great people that are trying to step up and do something to like kind of correct this whole thing.
Well, I think that's very important to share. So. But I think this question of real world impact is a big one. I think something that I saw earlier today, because the right has effectively attacked not just our rights but access, right? Because in many states they don't even have access, and that's normally right. But because that is happening, we have this real huge culture of just mass distraction that kind of generates, and I appreciate what Deanne just mentioned about having a little bit of hope, because people contact you and say, you know, what is it that I can do? And I think that certainly in my position, I absolutely need that, because sometimes it looks so bleak that these things are happening, but luckily in our state, we are that. We're really united in the Midwest, and we've received, as you illustrated, numerous women coming from other states, from Indiana, largely, from Missouri. For some reason, people in Missouri generally think that people don't want to have access. I don't know. But they are coming to Illinois, and they are receiving support in Illinois, which is really important for us to have these resources available. But we also have to look long term, right? We need to look long term about what does that real impact mean. Can the state of Illinois manage the health care of women from all over the country, right? That's a real question. And we have to figure out in our community, how do we address that? How do we make sure that on the local level, on the state level, and for our federal delegation, that they're going to get the additional resources necessary for us to do that, right? For us to establish additional clinics. We don't have, outside of Champaign, Urbana, there is nothing south of us, right? We gotta go very, very far to find resources in reproductive health outside of Champaign, Urbana, and then when you start going south, it gets considerably worse. So we know this is a real thing. And then to turn around and see the criminalization of abortion. I've been to the clinic. I've seen people out there with unbelievable, not just, I don't even know why they don't know what's assault. In many cases, it's assaulting other people as they try to enter on their own free will to get the services that they're entitled to in the state of Illinois, yet, right? So the lack of economic resources for people to travel to nearby states is a real issue, and it will continue to be one that we have to grapple with in Illinois. We also want to make sure that people, don't lose access because of their race, right? Their gender, their zip code, which we know is a huge issue. She just gave us the stats about the impact of not having enough money to afford the services. We did pass in Illinois that you could utilize reproductive health services with your Medicaid card so that poor women could still access services. We have a very conscientious General Assembly when it comes to reproductive health services, thank God, because we would be like England if we did not. But we have another issue at the bottom of that, right, that really impacts Black women on another level, as Karen just mentioned earlier, that we don't even always talk about the criminalization of Black women and Black women reproductive health and maternal mortality among Black women is extremely high. We've been trying to pass a particular bill, which I won't turn this into, but we've been trying to pass this bill to address that issue, right? To establish more services for Black women in the maternal aspects of this. We have a lot of work to do around racism, classism, sexism that we have to do. But one thing that I would say, because I would be remiss if I did not, and for anybody who's in a nonprofit, just exclude what I'm saying. It's not their statement, it's mine. We need to stop electing Republicans to anything. I'm just saying. No, I'm being extremely serious, and I'm not being partisan, I'm being serious. Because we continue to ignore the fact that someone like myself started at the county board. I was elected at the county board to represent my community, and I'm a Democrat. And I took those issues that were my experiences to the county board, and I advocated on behalf of my constituents against prison expansion, against locking up everybody, providing more community health services to our community-based organizations. I took that experience with me as a Black woman. Then I went to the city council and I said, no, charging people fines for marijuana is absurd. It's absurd to arrest our students and our community members at a high and disproportionate rate. I took those values with me to the city council. Then I turned around and took the fact that I support reproductive health rights and I support equality to the state legislature. I took those values with me. Now, if you look, you follow me from the local level, you follow me to the county board, you follow me to the state level. I'm taking the values that I have within me and that I fought for in my community to that next level. If you allow these folks to run for office, and we are in an election cycle, so those who are watching, you should pay attention to this portion of the meeting. People are running for office and they're trying to hide from you. See, they don't want to answer the question, where do you stand on marriage equality? Where do you stand on reproductive rights? Where do you stand on voting rights? They don't want to answer these questions. Oh, it has nothing to do with me. False. And as long as we allow people to slide back and to occupy seats in our courthouse that will then recommend people to the appellate level, who will then recommend people to the Supreme Court of Illinois, who will then overturn your rights if they get a chance, we are continuing to do what democracy and change described. So we have to stop it and look at the intersectionality of voting rights, of women's rights, of LGBTQ plus rights, right? We need to look at all of these and make every elected official responsible for them. That's my 2 cents. And that's me, that ain't none of them.
I love part, right? It's huge, right? People show you who they are the first time, right? Right. But I I want to do what Dr. Ann said, and I want to humanize this, what does it mean? Because I had a chance to reflect, I know it's going to be here. What is the real life impact? So, for those of you who don't know, I do the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative, and I do a lot of work, right, supporting individuals, families, people who've been impacted by trauma, and more particularly right now, like gun violence. But I came to this work trying to look at, like, you know, what causes people harm, and also what promotes healing. And I don't know if most people know, but there's this huge study called the ACE study that looks at like 1 to 10 child traumas and its impact on all of our health, wellness, and well-being. And many individuals who might find themselves in a space where they, there's actually data that says this, in the need of an unplanned pregnancy or an unexpected pregnancy or just not right time pregnancy, statistically have experienced an adverse childhood experience. More than likely they've had at least 4 adverse childhood experiences, because there's a connection between experiencing childhood adversity and a whole bunch of reproductive and other health issues. And right, we can do a long conversation about why, but if you can imagine, if someone has taken away my ability to choose what happens to my body, perhaps when I was younger, or I've been raised in a household where I can't have voice, choice, and agency, learning how to come to a space where I can tell you what I want, when I want it, how I want it, very complicated. As a sexual abuse survivor, it probably took me a long time to know when I could say yes or no to sex, sexuality, do I have a right to protection or not? All really complicated questions, right? It is not easy to think about what it takes to be able to negotiate. So we're in a space, right, where folks who are already vulnerable, who've experienced vulnerabilities, who are going to lose, right, the ability to say what happens to my body is a core right to be, right? Like, it's so fundamental to my survival, my mental health, my sense of wellness, my sense of well-being. And these kinds of decisions reinforce feelings of powerlessness and hopelessness and despair. And I learned this from a long time ago. Rupi Goldberg in this book, a collection of narratives of women who made the decision to end pregnancies, to terminate pregnancy, said that it is never, many people have quoted this, but the decision to not carry on pregnancy is never about choice, not choice. It is always about a higher choice. Like, it's my decision to choose my life, right? Like, to choose me. And sometimes it's the decision to take care of my children. It is the decision to possibly have a future. And so to take away those things, and I've met women who are really vulnerable in so many different ways, who, when they're in a predicament where they can't control their body, or who feel like their voice doesn't get heard, or that their wants, needs, and desires for safety and protection and freedom and well-being, right? To not have that, and we're having those experiences because I do work in Indiana, so I know women who are having those experiences. It's creating a level of suffering. And right, we can play that out because we know that when mommies are suffering in pregnancy, they create children who are more vulnerable mentally, physically, emotionally. There's recent studies around maternal depression and its impact on children long term. We know that it changes how people parent. So, right, people spend thousands and millions of dollars on violence prevention, but if we make children, people who say, I don't have the ability or capacity to parent this child, like I'm choosing me and my own well-being and maybe force that upon me, we know we can predict those are children who unfortunately will be more likely to show up in child welfare, criminal justice, all their systems. And I'm gonna say something that's not gonna sound politically nice, but in some ways it feels like we decided to do some reforms, right, around criminal justice, around child welfare, around equity, around health. And now we're like, let's create another pipeline of people to enter the system so that we can keep more people employed, right? Like it feels like so insidious. We're in a time where we can provide opportunities for freedom and healing and resiliency and wellness. That's what we were talking about right before this all happened. To be like, no, you don't have a right to be, you don't have a right to become, you don't belong here. And we've been here before, right? We have a pretty dark history around women's reproductive history, particularly on women of color, about low-wealth women we have exploited, violated, taken advantage of, investigated, experimented, just done outrageous things to them and their children. And we continue to bear those scars, and we are creating lasting, historical, intergenerational, communal scars that will cost us billions and billions of dollars.
Okay, I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna switch it out because I started being personal and I couldn't possibly get more personal with Karen. Thank you so much, Karen. I really respect and appreciate you so much. Thank you for that. I actually have a few quotes from major medical organizations, starting with the American Medical Association. If I can find my notes here. Organizes. In July of 2022, the American Medical Association met and unanimously recognizing reproductive health care as a human right. Intersectionality of all humans, it's a human right, and that includes the right to contraception and abortion. So that's the American Medical Association, which when I was growing up, I always thought it was very conservative, white male dominated. I didn't really know what to do with it. It wasn't, it has changed. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which is the national organization of obstetricians and gynecologists, doctors who take care of women during their reproductive years and beyond, have advocated to improve access to full spectrum reproductive services, to integrate abortion as a component of mainstream medical care, which, having worked for Planned Parenthood for 26 years, I can tell you, we did not feel like we were mainstream medical care. So this is really big to me that ACOG is now coming out and saying abortion is mainstream care, and they're scrambling because they have decided that being trained to provide first trimester abortion services minimally is part of the training for any doctor wanting to become board certified as an obstetrician and gynecologist. And now some of their major institutions, Baylor in Texas, other places, doesn't have access to that care or those training opportunities, and they're looking only where we can send our residents, how we can make arrangements for that. So it's not the same as a woman trying to get services in the moment, but it still is very impactful. But for ACOG to come out, and I've got a number of different statements from ACOG that I might be able to find, but there was also, here's one. You can Google ACOG abortion policy, that's what I did. All people should have access to the full spectrum of comprehensive, evidence-based healthcare. Evidence-based. Abortion is an essential component of comprehensive evidence-based healthcare as the leading medical organization dedicated to the health of individuals in need of gynecologic and obstetric care. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists supports the availability of high-quality reproductive health services for all people and is committed to protecting and increasing access to abortion. One of the things that the AMA has done a lot is to start working on legal aspects, not only to protect physicians, but to protect other people that are assisting patients and to protect patients themselves, because the medical risk is definitely there from being denied access, but the legal risk is also significant, and some people are saying it's even more. And I wanted to try to find the quote from the president of my organization, the American Academy of Family Physicians, President Sterling N. Ramsden Jr., MD, who's the new president, and he says laws restricting access to reproductive health care, including abortion services and contraception, exacerbates inequities in healthcare system. These laws disproportionately affect those patients who are in underrepresented groups and underserved areas, which already puts them at increased risk of maternal death. So, at a pretty high level, in what I'm proud to say is my profession, we are addressing these things, at least with good words, and hopefully being followed with good deeds.
By the way, you all can say more things, and you don't have to just speak once. So if you don't want to respond to each other or ask each other questions on the same topic, it's so polite. We love it. But I know most of you are a little less polite sometimes, so you're welcome to bring your whole selves to the conversation. So we want to see more of this, because as you'll say, this is great, but like, how do you really sum up the impact of something like this? You know, I think about you brought it up, what's next, right? And I think about how Christie Clinic decided that they were no longer going to provide fertility services to any of their staff who aren't straight married couples. They're just openly discriminating. And nobody's doing anything about it. We tried to make some noise, and we couldn't really get people to, you know, get on board with this noise. But this is, I feel like this is the empowerment of a moment like this, where, you know, like you had said, right, like they try something and then they, oh, we got there, okay, let's try a little bit more, okay, let's try a little bit more. And it just feels like the impact of this is going to continue to ripple, right, in the lake. It is going to continue to ripple in these ways. Once they know they can go this way, well, now we can go this other way, and now we can go this other way, now we can go this other way. And fertility, of course, is reproductive justice, right? And so what does it mean to tell an entire segment of your community, we're not gonna do it? I look at that, I just look at it, that is in your face discrimination, and yet somehow people are like, oh. You know, so if you all want to say more things about the impact, please do.
I mean, this is news to me. I had not heard that. We received lots of calls and complaints about different healthcare issues in the office. But that one we had not received and didn't know. But my activist spidey senses tell me that we should probably collectively bring a roundtable together to address that issue with Christie Clinic. Because all of these clinics, including the hospitals, receive tax dollars for operational expenses. So without understanding the totality of that, I think that there should be some conversation around that. And what we should be doing to address that issue. But I think that there's a real need for us we need to unify all of these issues, right? It's important, I remember the first Women's March, the original one that was done in DC. And as they were organizing the Women's March, there were people from all walks of life that were there. There were allies, there were males that were there. Of course, our LGBTQ community was there. The Black community was there. The Muslim community and women was there. And I remember one of the organizers saying in an interview that they said, well, it just seems like, how can you get that many people together? How can you get them to come out? And she said, we fought. We fought. Because unless we raise this to the level of significance that it is, right? To overturn Roe, 50 years after its implementation, in a space and time where you're also taking away other fundamental rights at the same time. We can't respond as if that was the episode of Young and Restless, and we'll come back to tomorrow's episode and see the next one and see what happens. We have to respond as they are responding, right? They find these things to be part and parcel to their rights, to deny others, which is part of American history, rights. And their strategy is to continue to unravel these things, as you just enlightened us with this one, because we are usually distracted by the episodes, as opposed to tying this together. This is one movie. This is a movie. Michael Myers has done some amazing documentaries, and he keeps trying to show us that this is a common thread in thinking, right? Labor rights, violations, immigration rights, healthcare rights, right? This is one movie, and we keep responding as if it's just an episode. And it's not. It's actually a concerted effort to deny the others, right? Those who are considered others, inclusion in the American system, the American dream. And that, I think, is what should be the quality of our human kindness. Because we have to really make this space a kind space for us to work together. And more importantly, to push back on, whether it's in our state or outside of our state, the attempt to make America great again. That collegial term says a lot. It tells us that there's a period of time where someone felt that that was great. And I can't point to one in the experience of African Americans. So, to migrant workers, to women who are sex trafficked, I just can't point to one.
Most white men, let's be honest. Because they were thinking working class white men, they were thinking men in unions, men that right?
There's a confluence of issues that unless we, again, really start saying, no, hell no, we won't go. We're not doing that. We're not going to accept that. That is not our reality. And that actually can't be the reality of America. Otherwise, this is a very different space, and some of us have to consider our alternatives in reality. That's what we need to do. We gotta join our movements together and not separate them in a way that some of us don't feel our voices. I can tell you stories. One is a Black woman in the political space that's dominated by males and dominated largely by white males. I can just tell you some stories, right? About how often the attempt to silence me, because I don't know how it tries to take place. But that is a real thing in this space of unpacking all of our rights and rolling us back to some period of time that was great for somebody, but certainly was not great for the masses.
Can I ask Representative Adams a question? What about Kansas? Because you know, we all hear that the majority of Americans are in favor of reproductive rights, abortion rights, access to abortion as part of reproductive health care, and yet, what is it, 27 states have restrictive legislation, and there's more to follow. But what happened in Kansas? There was a referendum that was very poorly worded, it was very confusing, and yet people didn't come out and vote. It doesn't have force of law, I guess it's just a statement. You want to talk about that a little bit? That's like, that was organizing, that was people coming together.
That's a really interesting coming together. If you have a little bit, and I have a little bit
I like to hear
Kansas, which I think plays well into the moment in what they were able to do in flipping the conservative issue on its head. Back when Kansas was becoming a state, this is an interesting thing. Of course, Missouri and Kansas are butting up against each other. And I'm reading this book, which is, that's why I'm not that smart, I am reading the book. I'm reading a book called The Zealot and the Emancipator. And in The Zealot and the Emancipator, the history of Kansas is recounted. I have had the privilege of going to Kansas recently. But in this particular book, it talks about how Kansas became a state. And this idea of popular sovereignty that now in our current iteration came back, right, to be a useful tool for the people of Kansas to redress that issue in Kansas. But the popular sovereignty doctrine, which was not good for Black people at that time, so it means the argument around slavery is part and parcel to the history of Kansas. But in the making of Kansas as a state, the popular doctrine became part of that history. And they utilized that popular sovereignty, I should say popular sovereignty, to prevent Kansas from becoming a slave state. But there was battles that took place, of course, physical battles took place in the history of Kansas that brought them to that moment where eventually they, that territory bought into the concept of some pseudo form of slavery with mutual compromises and so forth. But the idea of this doctrine that then became useful in the argument in Kansas, where people said, no, you can't tell us as a state what we have to do, federal government. We're going to put this referendum on the ballot, and we're going to let the people decide what they want to do with this. And that's what they did back in the 1800s when they were arguing this territory becoming a slave state as well. They used popular sovereignty. And so they then, somebody who came up with the brilliant idea to use popular sovereignty to say, these people are trying to tell us what to do. That's against our rights, right? That's against our individualism, which they really pride in Kansas, this individual concept. And they utilized that to win the protections in Kansas in order to prevent them from taking away their rights in Kansas. Well, I think that was a great strategy. It was a great strategy. It worked in that particular case. I think there will be, of course, backlash to that in Kansas because their state legislature is right-wing Republican, and they will come back with additional things that they'll do in the legislative body, which they will do according to the ruling from the Supreme Court, to put up new laws and things that they are, I'm sure, hatching as we speak. But we have to understand the history in order for us to fight that. And I'll say this because we're at a university. This is a university, we do research here, and I'm blessed. I'll shout out to all the professors that I work with here to do the research around the policies that we try to pass. The research part is really, really important. If we don't know the historical context or the right wants to take away the historical context, so we don't really have to talk about Audre Lorde's work at K-12. They don't want us to talk about Audre Lorde, she's lesbian, we don't want to talk about that. That is dangerous for us to take out the actual history because then you won't know what has happened and you won't know how to utilize what you have in that moment for this present moment. And that is a very important part in order for us to fight back. So it is important for us to know the history. We want to know how did that happen, because it might need to happen in another state like Arizona, perhaps. Don't know if they have proper sovereignty there, but that might be something in that historical record that we can utilize to organize and to fight that. And I think that that's important as well.
And I think we need to think back at what you said about episodes when, not compartmentalizing these like little things and then like kind of moving on, because I think Kansas did a great job of leveraging that emotion right after, and being able to get people out to vote. But so many states just kind of forgot that they had laws on the books, like Michigan, who had a law on the books from I think the 1930s, and many states had trigger laws that they hadn't even considered. Luckily, here in Illinois, we actually did have trigger language, and we had just taken away that language, I think in 2017.
Well, we repealed it in 2017 because we knew at that point that this case was happening. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. We could see the court being stacked. We knew what was on the horizon, and unfortunately, a lot of people were really, really in denial about it. I mean, just talking to my family in Ohio, telling them you are going to lose choice very soon. Like, they're like the Planned Parenthood straw promotions, right? Not in Ohio. I'm telling you, you're about to lose choice. People were just in such denial that they were still ignoring these laws and trigger language that almost immediately went into effect in a lot of states, or is now, being held up in courts. But we saw places like Wisconsin where that decision came in, people had to walk out of the health center. I mean, it was like, that's it, shut it down, like, go find someplace else to do it. So I think we really need to have longer memories. We need to stop having these little episodes and really think about how there are laws on our books in the 30s that are still oppressing people today.
And if I could just add, after the emotional win of Kansas, the country was excited, but now here we are right back into an election cycle, and instead of kicking out those Republican members out of the General Assembly in Kansas, that's not what's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So I just want to offer one thing, and I'm going to try to say this, you keep my number. So, but I think so often we have had conversations, particularly for those of us who are committed to equity and justice, we have had conversations. There's a whole other contingency that has hard conversations. And the way that we win these issues is to speak to people's hearts. And this is a brain science piece, because we keep talking through frontal cortex like these are intellectual decisions. And what we need to do is talk to brainstem, to get to people's emotional center. And if you think about it, people will say, I voted because I felt it. And we will give you a 10-point plan and a reason and policy platform. And this really we need to think about how the brain works. And people have spent a lot on the other end of the spectrum have invested a lot in taking that research around brain, how brains work, and how you speak to the emotional center of the brain and work. So part one. Part two, and the issues work together. Is, and I'm trying to not use too much very language, but from my experience, staying open to the complexities that are happening to us, staying open to the impact, thinking about what it would mean to believe that you grew up with this mythology of the American dream and access and privilege, and then to know that that can go away. Being aware of the contradictions between what your caregivers, your family, you were even instructed, said, and actually how it happens, right? All of those things, there are bunches of responses, right? Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And Representative Amos keeps saying fight, but I think as a society, most of us spend our energy in freeze. We numb out all day long. It's why people are connected to their social media. It's why we have an opioid crisis. No one wants to feel. And in order to move forward, we're going to have to feel a whole bunch of messy feelings. It's why after George Floyd, everybody contracted back and said, let's not deal with racial equity and social justice, because it opens up historical wounds. I had to acknowledge, like, maybe my family was complicit, this is a oppressive idea, maybe I was a little oppressive, right? Rather than deal with those complexities, right, to say, like, oh, I am contributing to I use my privilege incorrectly. I can't be like pro-Black lives and also anti-trans, right? Like those two things, like I can't, rather than deal with it, people kind of go back to numbing. And if you find yourself, right, I worked at a lot, particularly in this moment with reproductive health, where like I just want to deny and pretend like the issues will kind of go away, or someone else will resolve it, or maybe I'll volunteer or I'll donate, but I really won't do the day-to-day work, right? If you're not committed to sort of being all in, you're buying into a system that wants to keep you numb. And so if you ever say, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm not going to read the paper for a month because I don't want to know bad news, those are the systems that people are counting on for those of us with goodwill and conscience to do. And so this is a hard issue. And so I do think that this is a moment where, for those of us who have chosen to terminate pregnancies, we need to start telling the truth, because then it looks like, right, like, oh, it's somebody else's issue, as opposed to, right, statistically, how many women ended up terminating pregnancies? Most women who kind of make it into the middle class probably had to make some reproductive health choices around when and how, because there's, at best science, there's no such thing as perfect birth control. And I used to always say promises of abstinence break more than times, right? Like, there's some real things, right, about like life and life experience. These are hard issues. And I would invite us to like really, like to downshift and to use like how, use skills of change. Imagine it's your 13-year-old daughter who is curious about sexuality and ends up having, like a sexual experience because, again, at 13, you don't think about birth control. So the likelihood that a pregnancy could be resulting in that. Imagine having to deal with this. And although we talk a lot about the realities of Black and brown women, white women, this is you too, because it could be your 13-year-old daughter. And although if they eliminate the risk, and although you maybe take a flight, if you still have to fly 4 or 5 states, it is a trauma. There's shame. There's guilt. Like, I want white women to say, like, I know, because when we talk about poor people, then there's some white women to go, oh, that's not me, I'm good, right? No, it's you too, because that's not how laws work. If whatever you do to the least of my brother or sister can, you do to me. And I need you to realize that this is your issue too.
Yes. I mean, we're already there, so I'm just gonna take us over there. What in the world do we do about all this? Like, y'all are already starting to talk about this, so let's just turn it there, yeah? There's a million directions you can go with this question. What do we do? There is legal, there is our actual physical health, there is what do we do to connect to other people, and y'all are already talking about it. I'm gonna bring it to Dr. Robert first, and we'll talk about the medical side of this. Like, what do people do when it comes to their own access, their own, perception? Like, what can they do for themselves to handle the situation that they're in?
Well, I'm so glad we have an education person from Planned Parenthood here, because education and knowledge are power. And I did bring some handouts with me, with apologies. These are from a pharmaceutical company named Bayer. I'm not advertising them as a great anything, but they did produce a nice little, some of these places do produce these nice little educational things. And this basically says, how effective is your birth control? I'll leave these up here. They're very small and simple, but we need to educate ourselves and our young people about what is effective contraception, especially if we are going to lose abortion as a backup. And, you know, Allen Guttmacher Institute is a good source of statistical information. 1 out of 4 American women has an abortion during her reproductive years. That's white women, black women, Indian women. It's going to be harder for black women and Native American women and other rural women to get those services, but 1 out of 4 somehow manage to do it. So the best contraception are what's called long-acting reversible contraception. We call it LARC for short. And those methods are prescription only. They have to be provided by a doctor or a nurse practitioner who is trained to, or a physician's assistant who's trained to provide them. And they are very expensive. So we need to support those. We need to train our providers to provide those. We need to train our young people and ask for them. All of those are currently available, I believe, at your Planned Parenthood affiliates, that are also available at Champaign Public Health. And they're available at the clinics. They're covered by all insurances, they're covered by Medicaid, and we have family planning grant money that will help people who are not covered by Medicaid or insurance. So that's number 1. In terms of abortion access, if you're counseling somebody who is thinking about terminating pregnancy, the earlier the better, and that's why all of these restrictions and restrictive laws and barriers have created so many health risks for especially poor and underserved women, because the earlier the pregnancy is terminated, the safer it is for the woman. Terminating a first trimester pregnancy before 9 weeks of pregnancy is very, very, very safe. And there's 2 very safe ways to do that. One is what's called surgical abortion or suction abortion, which is done by a doctor or another trained provider in the clinic. So you have to go through the gauntlet of demonstrators and harassers to get in there, and you have to get up on the table and put your feet in stirrups and be invaded. So some women don't like to do that. Back when we were first starting to do medication abortion at Planned Parenthood, some of my colleagues were like, why would a woman want to take pills that are going to cause a miscarriage, and it's going to be messy and painful and bleed all over the place and last for up to 2 weeks when they just get it over with in 10 minutes in the clinic. So, well, that's you, okay, that's your choice, but that's not everybody's choice. And actually, what is it, over 50% of abortions in the United States are now medication abortions. So medication abortion is one of the things that we can make more available, more accessible. There are reputable organizations such as American Eligible OBGYN, American Academy of Family Practice, and the American Medical Association that are working on that. We have to remove restrictions from the FDA about who can provide mifepristone, which is one of the, we used to call it RU46, one of the components of medication abortion. And we also have to guard against the illegal sham, what do you call them? The bad people that are advertising on the internet. Because the internet is both our friend and our enemy in this situation. And I'm just going to open up that big can of worms about 5 minutes before this is over. Because you're all young people, you can get together and talk about all this over your social media. But the internet is both making medication abortion more accessible for women where it's not immediately accessible to them, because they can order the things that can be delivered on Amazon or FedEx or whatever. What? telehealth. So they can get the information and they can get the pills, they can take them at home very safely. It's not necessary to go to a clinic, it's not necessary to have an exam, it's not necessary to have an ultrasound. We thought all of those things were necessary, but they're really not. Women can figure these things out for themselves if they know when their last period was, when they know when they probably got pregnant, which many women do. They can safely do it at home. So that's a good thing. The bad thing is two things. One is there's those people, scam artists that are, it's like with the fentanyl, the fake drugs. There's fake drugs out there. So you can't get the cheaper stuff or the glitzier stuff. You've got to go to a reputable organization. And then the other thing is the internet is not a safe place for any of us, and especially now. And I read some very frightening articles, and you probably are aware of these too, about how the internet can be used to track women that are trying to get abortion services, or even get information about abortion services, or even keeping track of her menstrual periods on her iPhone to aid in her fertility control. Somebody else can have access to that, and that information can be sold. So there's money to be made taking advantage of us opening up the website.
You don't need to apologize. Do you want to add anything to that kind of stuff as far as like the medical stuff, or do you want to speak to the other person?
Super short time, let me just plug a couple of things. If people are looking for something to do, donate time or money, there's some really great organizations. Abortion America is a great organization, but there's organizations that help pay for abortion, travel, things like that. So like the Midwest Access Campaign or Midwest Access Coalition, they have volunteers that will help drive someone to their appointment, and volunteers that will stay with someone during their appointment, which is really important, especially when we have so many people coming from out of state and might be coming by themselves. There are people who offer up their home for that person to stay overnight. So there are lots of different ways to kind of help, even if it's not like a way that's like donating actual money. I also just want to say that education is really great. Always advocate for sex education. This is something that's really important, and not a lot of students are getting it. Vote. Think about voting. Like, make sure you vote in every election, and tell your friends and family to vote. And I wanted to just share one thing. A friend of mine, before she got pregnant, she has 2 kids now, but she had a really rough time getting pregnant. And then when she did get pregnant, she had a very rough pregnancy. And we had this conversation after she had her first child, and she told me, you know, this pregnancy made me more pro-choice than I have ever been. She was like, I wanted this pregnancy so bad, and it was so rough. I can't imagine someone going through what I did, and they did not want this pregnancy, and they were forced to carry this pregnancy. And I think about that all the time. So it's just a really important thing for me to kind of pass on, because a lot of people think, oh, well, once you have a child, you're no longer pro-choice. A lot of people are much more pro-choice.
So I will be really, really quick. So 2 strategies, in addition to voting, just staying socially conscious. So like read the paper, share what you news, talk to your friends, stay engaged, because I want you to stay in this process and across the board. And not only do I want you to vote, but I want you to mobilize a community of people to be with you and talk through these issues. Because I want you to bring 5 friends. Because there's a lot of talk about registration, and I was like, they also need to show up the polls, right? And then the second thing that I always, and this is a big step, but the way that we are resilient is that we find our path, right? So every day, where you find yourself silencing yourself, or not speaking truth to power, or not knowing something, just do something different. Just to be like, I can show up here. I can be an ally. I can advocate for equity. I can say something that makes people feel uncomfortable. And the more we do that, the more we change the culture, climate, and environment to be more healing and wellness and also justice oriented. It's a verb, but it only comes through being. We're not going to think our way out of this. We're going to have to do it.
All right, Representative, you want to have the last word?
Thank you. I certainly think these wonderful panelists. I've learned a lot, taking some notes, I always do. And I thank Dr. Robin for her very clear and concise direction on what you should do for reproductive health contraceptives. We've done some really amazing work at Blue Moon. I'm proud of our General Assembly's work. We expanded access to contraceptives. We passed just recently that you can have standing order at the pharmacy. We've made the atmosphere available on our college campuses. We've expanded those access points greatly in Illinois, and I'm truly proud of the work that we've done. We have a little bit more work that we can do, which we will take up hopefully in the field session. Some other access points dealing with our clinics. We increase the Medicaid rates, right? But we don't have a clinic see the service of people, right? So we need to address the clinic issue in the state of Illinois. And then lastly, I'll say that I love Karen because Karen always reminds me not to always fight, but to think about our hearts. Because she's my pillar, so I appreciate that. We do need to think about, the heart because people are truly hurting. Yes, policy is important. Yes, voting is extremely important because these policies come as a result of somebody who got elected to do something, and what they did, we don't appreciate. So we have to get people to vote. We can't sit at home. And I'll just say this in closing that in Michelle Obama's book, I read a lot. In her book, Becoming, she spoke at this moment towards the close of her book about something that really hurt her as they were in the second term. And she said, Barack had done so many things for a hostile Congress, which, because we didn't turn out in the term of his term as president, he could not appoint to the Supreme Court, which put us in the moment that we were in. We did not get those appellate judges that put us in this predicament in the states. Absolutely. So we cannot forget, she said, that when you have someone who is in the work and they've committed themselves to doing that work, you have to show up and support them. And unfortunately, we don't do that hard enough. We stay at home and don't do things. I do hope that in this moment, let's not watch the next episode. Why don't we just make a movie? Let's make a movie. And thank you all so much for coming out and joining us now.
Thank you, everybody. Please, tomorrow night we'll have more panels. Check out all the stuff going on this week for Pride Fest. There's education, there's whole system fun. Thank you so much. Good night. Thank you.